Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Hope everybody had a wonderful Pesach. Tonight, a subject which is very much in the news, Zionism. I don't think I can, in the 35 plus years that I've been living here in Eretz Israel, I can remember a time where there was so much divisiveness, so much polarization between what they call the right wing and the right wing and the left wing. It could be, I'm not a politician, I'm not a political analyst, but it could be that if you look at the demographic, really this was a problem waiting to happen from the very beginning, or at least from a while ago, and it's just manifesting itself now. Meaning that the way the state was set up was as a left wing, very socialist, some might even say communist idea. Arguably, the kibbutz was probably the only example of pure practical communism that ever existed. For sure, the founding fathers of the State of Israel were very left-wing, left-leaning, and that patrimony has been handed down in a succession of families who constitute, I would say, the core intelligentsia, the upper class, what's referred to as something of a joke by my children, calling it the Tzfon Bonim, the people who live in North Tel Aviv. There's a whole culture there which has grown up, and they were the ones who started the state. Really starting with Menachem Begin, there was another influence that came in, which was with the influx of Sephardi Jews, and arguably much more traditional, maybe not all completely religious, but certainly attuned much more to traditional values. So things started to change, and in fact Begin was the first one to tap in to that electoral base with some considerable success. So if you look at the demographics of typical left-wing families and typical right-wing families, and I'll include the religious community in the right-wing side of it for the sake of argument, the demographic means that slowly over the preceding years, what's been happening is the balance has been tipping more and more to the right. Which means that there's, at some point, this was, I guess, in a sense, bound to happen, that the values, the left-wing values which are espoused as being enshrined in the whole way the state was set up, at a certain point would become challenged by a larger right-wing majority. And of course, this is the first government that I can remember that has had anything like a clear majority. And that mandate of that majority was to refurbish, to go over the way the country is really, the balance of power in this country, which has been, as we've seen, provoked tremendous reaction. I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but we've got real problems. I just hope, I pray that everything will eventually come to a point of understanding. The Jewish people, the history of the state, at the beginning of the state, the incident of the Altalena, where there was nearly a civil war in this country right at the beginning of the state. And Baruch Hashem, I don't think we're anywhere near as bad as that now, but there is a tremendous sense of uncertainty and polarization. The media is very much controlled by the left wing, and they very much influence the opinions of people in Chutz La'aretz, in Americans, and I'm not getting into the rights or wrongs of who's right and who's wrong, but I think everybody agrees to some degree that some kind of overhauling needs to be done. The balance of power is very much with the Supreme Court and the established ruling class, quote unquote, in this country. And I thought this would be a good time to talk about what I believe to be real Zionism, which is not political at all. We discussed this actually in a couple of months ago, I think, but I think it's worth reviewing these ideas. What is Zionism? Where does the word Zion comes from? Zion. So let's go back to the creation of the world. The Gemara in Yuma, in Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis, tells us that when Hashem created the world, He didn't create it as a, so to speak, one finished existence. He fashioned it from a single infinitesimal point, where all the worlds above this world, so to speak, which are beyond time and space, formed into this one, and the Gemara calls it a rock, a stone, the Even Shesiyah, the foundation stone. And from there was extruded the entire creation. It started at this infinitesimal point where space and time came into existence from the spiritual worlds above this world, and the infinite chaining down from Hashem Himself to this world as the physical world that we have it, the Olam Asiyah. Excuse me. And then the world, so to speak, creation expanded until Hashem said, die, sufficient, it's enough. This is the understanding of one of Hashem's name, which is spelled Shin, Daled, and Yud. And we said Shah and then die, that Hashem spoke, He's Hashem, me who, Sha'oma, who said to the world, die, that's enough. In other words, the world would have theoretically gone on expanding and expanding and expanding. At a certain point, Hashem said, that's it, this is sufficient, Shah, die, that's enough. The word, and as I said, that the world starts off from that point, the Even Shesiyah. The word Shesiyah comes from it's connected to the word Hushtat, which means foundation. When we talk about something being the foundation of something, foundation really has two connotations. One is it's the point of departure. And also, it's the summation of all of that, everything that entity is supposed to be. Something is founded on. For example, right, the Declaration of Independence was the foundation of the United States of America. It was the beginning, but it also was a manifesto, a summation of everything that entity was to be. So when we talk about the foundation carries these two connotations. That place, the Even Shesiyah, from which the world started from, that infinitesimal point, is on a small hillside, a couple of kilometers down here, the Temple Mount. There's a stone on that mount called the Even Shesiyah, from where the entire existence, the entire creation as we know it, started. That was not only the place of creation, that was the place that Yitzhak brought up his son. Avram brought up his son Yitzhak as a sacrifice, the place of the Akedah. And that was the place where Yaakov Avinu had his dream, and he saw the connection between heaven and earth as a ladder, mutzav arza, stuck into the ground, the rosho magil l'shamayim, and its head reaching to the heavens. Again, that idea of connection between two realities. And that was the place where the first Beis HaMikdash was built, the second Beis HaMikdash was built, and Bezrat Hashem, very soon the third Beis HaMikdash will be built, the Hemer of Yomeinu. There's a psalm, Tehillim Nun, 50, which is called Mizmor LaAsaf. It says as follows, Mizmor LaAsaf, a song for Asaf, Mitzion, from Zion, Michlal Yofi, the essence, it's from the Lashon of Klal, consummation, Klal Yisrael, everything together, Lichlol, to gather together, Mitzion, which is the essence, the consummation of Yofi, of beauty, Elokim Hofia. God appeared. God appeared, which is what we've been talking about, from a place called Zion, which is the essence of beauty. In other words, this world was founded on something called Zion. Now, what does Zion mean? Again, Mitzion, from Zion, which is the Chlal Yofi, we'll come back to that. Elokim Hofia, God appears in this world. That is the point in creation where the total spiritual universe becomes something formed, the universe that we're aware of. So what does Zion mean? From this thing called Zion. The word Zion is connected to in the Haggadah, if you remember, we learned about how the Jewish people were Mitsuyonim in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. It's interesting because I think Mitsuyan is probably one of the few words where there's a direct idiomatic translation from the Hebrew straight into the English, which is the word when we talk about somebody who's Mitsuyan, okay, it could be translated as excellent, but a more accurate translation would be outstanding. Something which is outstanding. The Jewish people were outstanding in Egypt. We stuck out. The word for a grave marker is a tziun. If you go up to the north to the Kvarim, up in the Galil, you'll see tziun, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, tziun. The word tziun means to indicate. Meaning this entire world was created as an indicator. Mitzion, Zion, which means yes, sure. No, that's fine, thank you, okay. I appreciate it. Mitzion, from this concept called indication, which is the Michlal Yofi. Elokim Hofia, God appeared in this world. So let's understand this. We said that when something is founded on something, that foundation is its beginning, but it's also a declaration of its purpose. Meaning this entire world was founded with the understanding, with the purpose that it's supposed to indicate. It's supposed to indicate what? The connection. It's supposed to indicate the connection between this world, the world of space and time, to a world which is above this world. That there is a connection. That's the idea of the ladder. That is the whole function of this world. So to be a Zionist, in the strictest definition of the word means somebody who is involved in this divine work of showing the entire world that there is a connection, that this world is not something by itself. This world is only here to indicate that there is a world above this world. There's a connection. There's the Gemara in Kesuvos, there's a Gemara in Kesuvos which quotes a posuk which says, Machon l'shivtecha, the place of your dwelling, Pa'alta Hashem, you made, Mikdash Hashem konanu yodecha, the Mikdash, the Beis HaMikdash, which of course is the same place as Har HaBayit, which is the place of Zion, your hands prepared. You konanu, they founded. The two hands, so to speak, are the hands which meet at that point. The two hands, so to speak, of Hashem meet at the point of that connection. Machon l'shivtecha palta Hashem, Mikdash Hashem, konanu yodecha, plural, two hands. There's a Gemara in Bava Basra, several Gemaras, which describe a certain Taya, a certain Arab, who used to take Rabbi Baba Chana to various places and show him interesting geographical places. He showed him the place where Korach and his cohorts went down to the ground, and they could hear coming up from the depth. Moshe emes usurosa emes v'anu badim. Moshe is true and his Torah is true, and we're rebellious. We are fakers. There's another one of these Gemaras where this Taya, this Arab said to Rabbi Barbachana, come, I will show you where heaven and earth kiss. And he showed in the Mokum HaMikdash. The same idea of connection, of revealing there's a connection. There's a place where heaven and earth kiss, and that place is the same as the Evan Shasiyah, is the same as the Beis HaMikdash, is the same as the ladder of Yaakov Avinu, and the place of the Akedah. In other words, with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, what happened basically is that the palpable connection between this world and the worlds above it vanished, was destroyed. The Beis HaMikdash, many miracles, several miracles happened there. First Beis HaMikdash more than the second, but apparently you could perceive this connection there. And that was lost. Everything today seems very remote when we talk about the Beis HaMikdash. The idea of animal sacrifice, Bechlal, is a very difficult concept for the 21st century mind. How did that all work? And yet we know that was the holiest place in the world. And to us, it looks from the outside like a glorified slaughterhouse. So clearly something in our sensitivities is gone. We don't see it. We've lost that contact. We've lost that ability to see. It's, I guess, a bit like trying to describe a beautiful sunset to somebody who's Rahman al-Islam been blind all his life. You can talk about it, but your frame of reference is so removed from anything that God forbid, that blind from birth person understands, that it's impossible really to communicate what that was like. And similarly, it's impossible for us to really understand in any way what it was like. And in the sense, Tisha B'Av is where we mourn that. We mourn the destruction, and we mourn the fact that we can't mourn because we really don't know what it is. It's just beyond our understanding. With the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, we see heaven and earth as totally separate. And never the twain will meet. But maybe just one more idea which we could talk about is that it says in Sfarim that everything that happened to Yosef happens to Tzion. In the davening in the morning, we say, Lecha Hashem, to you Hashem, HaGedula is the Gevura. I'm going to translate these words with English words, but they're woefully inadequate, is the greatness and the strength, Tiferes, the splendor, Netzach, and the eternity, V'ahod, another word for like a shining light. Ki kol b'shamayim v'aretz, because you include Michlal Yofi, everything within heaven and earth. You connect heaven and earth. These are the midas by which Hashem runs the world. The midah of Yosef is Ki Kol Bashamayim Va'aretz, is the connection between heaven and earth. That's Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef, the gematria of Yosef is Yud, which is 10, Vav is 6, Samach is 60, Peh is 80, is 156. The gematria of Tzion is Tzadi, which is 90, Yud, which is 10, Vav, which is 6, and Nun, which is 50, which is also 156. Yosef HaTzadik was the provider. He was the one who funneled the energy and the wealth of Egypt out to a starving world. He was the provider. He was, so to speak, the cable. Now, it's interesting that Shlomo HaMelech, in his wisdom, was able to grow plants which only normally grow in Africa or far reaches of the world, here in Yerushalayim. And the reason is very simple. Because everything in this world, nothing physical can exist without some kind of spiritual influx, a spiritual core. So for anything to exist in this world, it has to have this influx of spirituality. All spirituality in this world comes down through the mikdash, the mokam mikdash, the place of the mikdash. And so to speak, it fans out. And I think they have this concept, maybe if you've heard about it in England, they talk about these things of ley lines or power cables, spiritual power cables, which really empower everything which is going to happen in the world comes from Yerushalayim. And that's why Shlomo HaMelech was able to grow certain plants that normally would only grow in some far distant place in the world, here in Yerushalayim, because he was able, through his wisdom, to tap into that exact place where that power cable, so to speak, of spirituality spread out through Yerushalayim and reached out across the world. Maybe I could add a personal note here, that my wife and I got engaged. My wife's from Argentina, and I'm British, and we got engaged on the day that the Argentinians and the British signed the peace treaty after the Falklands War. So I think Rav Nota Shiller should be well pointed out. He said, you see what happens, something happens in Yerushalayim, we got engaged and the power spread out to. So, but I'm not claiming sort of supernatural. I'm just saying that it's an interesting idea, but the idea is true. The idea is that everything in this world comes, all spirituality, all kiyum. Yeah.
Can I ask you if you? Sorry, I've done the rounds. Do you know about the tagim on the sefer in the Sefer Torah?
Can we leave that till?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, no, I think we'll, okay, yeah. Now, okay, so far so good. So far so good. Let's have a look at the Beis HaMikdash, the center of the Beis HaMikdash, the Kodesh Kodashim, where the Aron HaKodesh sat. The Aron HaKodesh sat on the Even Shesiyah, the place of connection, as we said, between this world and the worlds above this world. Now, there's a very interesting Gemara in Megillah that says, Ein ha'aron min hamida. Ein ha'aron min hamida, which translates as, the Aron takes up no space. The Aron has no space. Now, that's difficult to understand because we've all learnt in the Torah that the Aron had very specific dimensions. It was 2.5 amas by 1.5 amma by 1.5 amma. So how can the Gemara say, Eina Aron mida mida? So I did this little drawing here, which I think should explain it. And if you can see it, let's say, excuse my drawing, but let's say for the sake of argument, this is the Kodesh Kodashim, okay? And this is the Aron. Now, if you measure, let's say, from one side of the Kodesh Kodashim to the other side of the Kodesh Kodashim, you'll get A. If you measure from one side of the Kodesh Kodashim, in the place where the Aron is, to the other side, to this side of the Aron, you'll, let's say, get B1. And if you then take a tape measure, and you measure from the other side of the Aron to the other wall, you'll get B2. What the Gemara in Megillah is basically saying is that B1 and B2 equals A. In other words, the Aron has dimension, 2.5, 1.5, 1.5, but it takes up no space, which if you think about it is exactly what you would expect. Because that is the gateway. Zeh Shah Shamayim, as Yaakov Avinu said. So we would expect at any gateway to see evidence of both realities. The Aron is in this world. It has dimension, it has size, it takes up space. Or, I want to take that back, it has dimension, but it's in a place which is the gateway to that which is beyond space and time, and therefore it takes up no place. The Gemara, the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis, describing the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, maybe I should just preface this by saying there was a group of people called the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly. And they were the ones who were basically, along with them was Ezra, there were prophets, Nehemiah. Why were they called the men of the Great Assembly? Lama nikra shman Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. They were called that Shehechziru Atara Leyoshna. They returned the crown to its former glory. We'll explain. Asa Moshe. Moshe came along and he says in the Torah, Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vahanora. And the only reason we can use any kind of adjectives when describing Hashem, who clearly is beyond all adjectivalization, you can't use any adjective to describe Hashem. Because anything which would, an adjective basically defines and every definition limits, and Hashem by definition is limitless. The only reason we cannot use those specific epithets, those specific adjectives, is because the Torah itself uses those. Moshe came along, and that's the Torah, and it says, Hakel, Hagodol, Hagibor, Vahanora, God who is great, mighty, awesome, A-W-E. Says the Gemara, also Yirmiyah, Jeremiah came along after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Va'ama, and said, Nochrim mekarkerim behecholoi, aye no rosov. Nochrim, heathens, barbarians, mekarkerim, cavorting, dancing, prancing around, partying, we would probably say nowadays. Behechalo, in his sanctuary. Aye no rosov, where is Hashem's awe? Lo Oma Norah. Take out the word Norah from the davening. And they took the word out when they davened. They said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Huseinu Elokei Avraham Elokei Hakel Hagodol Hagibor. And they left out Norah from the davening. Yirmiyah, Jeremiah told them, take it out. You cannot call. Now, this has to be understood. Because clearly, as we said before, any adjective, any epithet, any midah, characteristic that we refer to Hashem as has nothing to do with Hashem in his essence. Hashem ba'atzmuso is something that we can't understand in anyone whatsoever. When we talk about his midot, we are really understanding his interface with his creation. We see how Hashem interfaces with the creation sometimes through Gedula, which is chesed, which is quote-unquote kindness. Sometimes we see him interfacing through Gibor, Gvura, which is din, which is strict justice. What Yirmiyah was basically saying is the midah of Norah, that interface which is called awe, A-W-E. Clearly, if Nachrim and Makarkim behecholoi, if these heathens are cavorting, are partying in the holiest place in the world, the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Even Shesiyah, if they're in there doing that, then clearly Hashem, so to speak, has shut up. He has ceased to relate to this world through his midah of Norah. Now it's interesting because if you take the letters of Norah, Nun, Vov, Resh, and Aleph, and you spell it from back to front, you get A, Aleph, Resh, Vov, Nun, Aaron. So to speak, the Norah, from Hashem's point of view, so to speak, the Nun, Vov, Resh, Aleph, we perceive in this world as Aleph, Resh, Vav, Nun, Aaron. They're one and the same thing. Okay, that's something else. As Yaakov Avinu said, when he was at the site of the ladder, the communication with the angels going up and down. He said, Ma Nora Hamokum Hazeh, how awesome is this place. Yaakov Avinu, even though there was no Aaron yet, nevertheless he perceived the essence of the place, Ma Nora, that this was a place where Hashem was manifesting his Nora. And as we said before, Yeremiah came along and he said, you have to take out Nora from the davening, and they did take it out. But now the Anshe Knesset Agadola, they were the ones who restored the crown to its former glory by being able to find something in the world which was the Nora that the Aaron represented in a different way. When Ezra came back from Babylon, from the exile, he saw things from a very different point of view. He saw that there was a keves, a lamb, bein shivim ze'evim, between 70 wolves, surrounded by 70 wolves. 70 is the number of the nations of the world. And yet the land was not consumed. The unhistorical, the anti-historical survival of the Jewish people in exile in Babylon. When Ezra came back, he perceived this as the Norah that Hashem had removed from the Aaron and was now displaying his Norah through the eternity of the existence of the Jewish people. Shivim Za'evim, a keves bein shivim ve'evim, and nevertheless the lamb is not consumed. 70 wolves, and yet the lamb carries on. The fact of the survival of the Jewish people is the Norah that now exists in the world, a world which has no Aaron anymore. This is what it meant. This is what it means when we say the Anshe Knesset Agdola, who Ezra was one of those, were Machzir Atar LaYoshna. They returned the crown to its former glory. And Yeremiah said, take out the word Norah. Came along Ezra and the Anshe Knesset Agdola, and they restored that Norah in the world in a different way, in the miraculous survival of the Jewish people. There's a story, and it's variously said, about Pascal, Voltaire, or the doctor of Frederick the Great. It doesn't really matter who said it. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it was Voltaire. Louis XIV asked Voltaire for one proof of the existence of God in the world, and he replied to him, the Jews, Your Majesty. Voltaire recognized that the survival of the Jews is mitzayin, is an indicator. It is indicating that continued connection of heaven and earth. We don't have an Aaron anymore that reveals the Norah. We don't have an Ephon Shasir, we don't know where that is anymore, where the foundation of the world, which was to indicate that, to me mitzayin, to indicate that connection, we don't have that anymore. What we have is the miraculous continuation of the Jewish people. Paul Davis, in A History of the Jews, actually, just parenthetically, it's an interesting book. Paul Davis is a non-Jew, and he doesn't have access. Most of what he writes about the time of the Torah and Chazal, he's not privy to the information and the knowledge we have, so is somewhat very inaccurate in many things that he says there. But what is interesting is, first of all, his account of the beginnings of Zionism. Makes very interesting reading. He points out something which I would consider to be hashgacha, that Chaim Weizmann, when he came here to try and drum up interest, if you think about it, it's kind of a somewhat miraculous in itself that he was able to get so much support from the English government, when it was quite obvious to everybody that there were quite a number of Arabs living in this particular part of the world. And the British Empire had, many, many millions of Muslim subjects in India and Pakistan before they were divided, who were not going to be at all happy about the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And yet for some reason or other, he managed to get the English government to declare their support for a homeland for the Jewish people. It comes out, if you look at the members of the cabinet at that time, the British cabinet, many of them were what we would call low church Protestants. Welsh, Lloyd George, for example, was a low church Welshman. Now, what's the difference between that and the Catholics? The Protestants, the low church, are brought up on a diet of Tanakh. They're very strongly into Tanakh. In fact, you see in America where many of these people, to escape persecution, went over to the States, and that's why you find in the States people called Jedediah and Obadiah, and all of these names straight out of Tanakh, Avadia, Yedidia. Because, and what's the point? The point that he was making was that these very people who had it within their power, the British Empire's power now, fighting against the Turks, and clearly we're going to win that piece of land. The people in charge of that were exactly the same people who'd been brought up, fed a diet of this idea that, of course, the Jewish people, the Jews belong in Eretz Israel. If they hadn't been from that particular religious persuasion, maybe Chaim Weizmann and the other Zionists of the time would not have found such a sympathetic ear in the British government. It's an interesting point to ponder. Okay, that's parenthetical. But Paul Davis, in his History of the Jews, he brings out this point, says that Davis, like many historians, are bothered by this fact. In fact, when I was growing up as a child, this is something that kind of struck me, how little we really talked about the Jews in our secular, I went to a non-Jewish school, secular history classes. I mean, it seemed to me at the time, even as a fairly young person, that this was something which was totally unhistorical. Where do you find a nation, small, exiled, reviled, despised, who've managed against, as Mark Twain once pointed out, the Jews saw them all, beat them all, and is still now showing no signs of infirmity in his, bright and aggressive mind. What is the secret of his eternity, said Mark Twain. Right? Babylon raised his hand and filled the world with I forget what he said there, filled the world with fury. The Parthian, the Greek, they're all sitting in darkness now. The Jews saw them all, beat them all, and shows no sign of infirmity. In his bright and aggressive mind, I think he says. Twain saw it. Every historian who really looks at history has to deal with this. Now, how do you deal with this? So, his name's gone out of my mind now. There was very famous, it'll come back to me, very famous English historian who called us the fossils of history. I'm not sure exactly how that managed to explain our continued existence. But Arnold Toynbee. Arnold Toynbee called us the fossils of history. Johnson has a different theory. Johnson says, and I quote, to explain, the Jews believed for so long and with such tenacity that they were the chosen people, that they became the chosen people. Now, I'm a great believer in positive energy and what's it called, positive thought. But, it does have its limits. I can sit here to the middle of next week and believe with all the positivity and self-commitment that I'm a Martian, but I very much doubt that little green things are going to sprout out of my forehead. There just is a limit to how much self-confidence and positive thinking can take you. Now, this is from a historian. It seems to me that Johnson, like so many other historians, are faced with something which is anti-historical, unhistorical. So I can't, if I'm a historian, if I'm Paul Johnson, I can't look at anything outside of my discipline. So I'm going to come up with some kind of nonsense, you'll forgive me, like this. But of course, for us, it's a no-brainer. It's clearly the anti-historical handwork of the historian with a capital H. So let's sum up what we've been talking about. the job of the Jewish people, to really be a Zionist, the whole point of this world, which is founded on something called tziyun, which means an indicator, is to indicate the connection between this world and the world above it. That is the Norah. Oh, we forgot something. Michlal Yofi. Tzion Michlal Yofi. As we said, Yofi, Tzion sums up what beauty is, Michlal, what beauty is. The idea, and we talked about it at Hanukkah briefly, I'll go over it, the idea of Jewish beauty is totally antithetical to the Greek idea of beauty. Beauty is only skin deep, we hear people saying. Beauty can never be skin deep. The word in Hebrew for face is panim. The face is the main place of the residence of the beauty of a human being. The word for face in Hebrew is panim. The word for inside in Hebrew is panim, the same word. What makes something beautiful is to reveal its essence, to reveal its panim. You see the inside of somebody in their panim. Mitzion, Michlal Yofi. Yofi, the beauty, only comes from the revealing of what the purpose is. God appears. The beauty of Tzion is that it reveals the internal, it reveals what this world is all about. That Norah, which is the same thing, that awe, when one sees that connection, Ma Norah HaMokum Hazeh, the connection of the ladder of Yaakov Avinu, was expressed through the Aaron, letters, Osios Aaron, Norah, same thing. When the Aaron is taken away, when now the Jews go into exile, and Yirmiyah says, take that out. You can't refer to Hashem with this epithet of awesome anymore. But they restored the crown to its former glory because they understood that the continued existence of the Lamb amongst the 70 wolves, all through the history of the Jewish people, is the revelation of the Norah of Hashem in this world. Which is, if you think about it, when you have a movement who is dedicated, as unfortunately some, not saying all Zionist parts of Zionism, but many, certainly the more extreme left-wing and anti-religious parts of Zionism, were dedicated to making the Jewish people like all of the other nations. Kechola amim. We want to be like everybody else. I think one of the Zionist writers said, we will not be free until there's a Jewish gangster in a Jewish prison and a Jewish prostitute standing on a Jewish corner of a street in Tel Aviv, Rahman al-Itzlon. That is the antithesis of what we're supposed to be. We are supposed to be that agency which says, no, we are not like everybody else. We have a job which is to point out, to indicate, to be mitzayin, that there's a world above this world. We and our future, our continuing future, anti-historical future, is the greatest proof, the greatest indication that there's a God in this world. We should be zocher very soon to see the Beis HaMikdash rebuilt, and that palpable revelation of the Shekhinah should dwell amongst us. B'mheira b'yameinu.